Good morning. I can see 56 of you have managed to join. That is sufficient for the quorum. And welcome to this yet other session at the beginning. Last time was an introductory, and I'm sharing my slides. One person to confirm if you can see. From your other end, my Wi-Fi seems to be a little bit weaker today.
Yes.
One person to confirm
Tunaona.
whether you're able to see the slides.
Yes, we can see them.
Okay. Quite a quick recap on what we saw in our introductory class. The prerequisite or the requirement for this class include anatomy, one medical physiology one, where we spend a lot of time talking about the cell, and some slight concept on nursing practice one. We'll be mentioning a few aspects as time goes by. These are the systems that we talk about, 11 of them, and today we'll begin with the endocrine system. At the end of the semester, there will be an assessment, and like the previous course, it will constitute a cut, which will be 30% of the contribution. But in between, I will also give assignment, and my assignment are usually in form of a Google form, meaning you'll be able to do it online. And usually assignment constitute 10%, and the cut 20%. A total will give you a 30. End of semester exam is 70%, but I set it out of 100% already. And upon once you do it, I'll reduce it to 70%. That will give you a total 100%. And you know the cut mark is 50. Anything below that one is a supplementary. The reference materials for physiology still remain to be the same. So Gaiton is a major reference book. So Ganong is a little bit summarized, and it gives a quick review of the system, and it's not as voluminous compared to Gaiton. We equally have another book called the BRS of Essentials of Physiology, which is more summarized than the two of them. And all of them should be available in your library. And you should also have a soft copy just in your phone because it's not a very big file. So the endocrine system consists of glands that are spread throughout your body. And these glands have some ducts, and the ducts connect to the blood system. And the purpose is simple: to release hormone and enable the body to communicate all the other functions. So the endocrine glands or organs is part of it. So we'll have the hormones, and we have a hierarchy that we classify them from the highest region to the lowest region, and you call that one an axis. And that axis is called hypothalamus, the pituitary axis. Hypothalamus will be on the highest level, followed by the pituitary gland, which is slightly below it. And we have other glands that form below them. And if you draw them in a structure, we'll be able to see that we have a hierarchy that comes out quite clearly. So this is a diagram illustrating just the order I was saying, that on the highest region, we have the hypothalamus, which sometimes we call it the master gland. And just below it, we have the pituitary gland. And at the neck region, we have the thyroid and the parathyroid gland. At the thorax, just above the kidneys, we have the suprarenal gland. But adjacent to the pancreas, which has two parts, the exocrine and the endocrine. So the exocrine is concerned with and they exert their function usually in some distance that is located away from the gland. And for that reason, we call it an endocrine, meaning the effect is being felt remotely away from the gland. Hormone, we classify them in several ways. So we can classify them based on their structures, what are they made up of. We can also equally classify them based on their receptors, on where the receptors are located. We can equally see them chemically in terms of their chemical structure on aspect like the molecular weight. But in terms of what they are made up of, we can broadly classify them into the steroid hormones and non-steroid hormone. The steroid hormones are manufactured from cholesterol, which is the precursor. And this includes the cortisol, the aldosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And you might have heard the term synonymous, that someone is on steroid or someone is misusing steroid. The reference is usually majorly on the sex male hormone, the testosterone, which the athletes in an aspect called doping is simply adding an exogenous testosterone into your body, and that one will have an effect, or for example, increasing your muscle weight. Those are examples of hormones that we classify them into steroid hormones, and the precursor molecule is cholesterol. Anything else that is not made up of cholesterol are called the non-steroidal hormone. And these are all amino acids, so meaning they are protein in nature. So an example is an insulin, parathyroid hormone, and all other hormones that are not steroid in nature. In terms of the receptors, so we can classify them as a protein. So a protein is made up of 2 amino acids, as we saw initially. It could be a polypeptide. When you link up many amino acids together, you get a very short or a long polypeptide. Some are a derivative of amino acids and others are lipid in nature. So they may affect the organ or tissue in ways that we'll see as time goes by. So another classification, again, is using the receptor basis. And in this basis, we get the class A or the group 1 hormones. So the group 1 hormones have the intracellular receptors. And while you are looking at the cell membrane, where we spend a good time, looking into the bilipid layer, and we said usually it's semi-permeable, in that it's allow a few molecules to pass in through. But being lipid in nature, anything that is made up of lipid will be able to easily diffuse through it. And this is one example of those hormones that are able to simply diffuse through it. And an example of it include all the steroid hormones, because they are lipid soluble and because they are made up of lipid in nature. And once they diffuse through the cell membrane, they will go directly into the nucleus, or they could be having their receptors within the cytoplasm, and the binding will form an hormone receptor complex, which will cascade a net of reaction until the final effect of the hormone will be seen later. That is one example or one classification. Another one based on this mechanism is what we call the group 2 hormones. So these hormones are unable to pass through the cell membrane, meaning their receptors is located within the cell membrane. You remember when you talk about the glycocalyx we said is simply a sugar attached into a protein, and one of the functions that it plays is being a cell receptor. This is the receptor we are talking about, and usually they are able to freely pass through that one and form the secondary messengers as we know them. I want you to slightly just go back in time. There was a class where we spent also some time talking about how the cells communicate, and we talk about the secondary messengers, and that is an example of that one. So the example of the secondary messenger include the cyclic AMP, and the examples of hormones that uses cyclic AMP as a receptor include the ACTH, the follicle stimulating hormone, and LH. Calcium could as well act as a secondary messenger. So an hormone could, for example, bind at the intracellular calcium receptors and cause the release of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. And thyroid releasing hormone is an example of that one. And also lastly, we have the cyclic GMP as also another type of a secondary messenger. Those are the receptors regarding hormones, but hormones are not always produced in larger quantities or in smaller quantities. It's because we have a regulation system that keeps them in check. So we either classify that one as a positive or a negative system based on how it interacts with the environment. So the negative system or the negative control system is the most common mechanism that hormone utilizes. The indicator is the serum level or the blood level of the related substance that is being suppressed. An example will be the blood sugar level, and the equivalent hormone will be insulin. Right now, because most of you have just woken up, and I'm sure almost all of you, none of you have taken breakfast, but your sugar level right now hardly goes below 3.9 millimoles per liter. And if you take your insulin level right now, which we measure it in micromoles, so there is a negative correlation between the insulin level and the glucose in your blood right away. So that is an example of what you call the negative feedback system. It is negative in an essence that once your sugar's level goes low, the insulin level will equally go low. But in the immediately, maybe after this class at around lunchtime, you quickly go and get your breakfast, or you eat anything, perhaps a snack, which is a carbohydrate. And 2 hours or 3 hours later after digestion, your blood sugars level will increase. And immediately it increases, your pancreas will release insulin level to bring the sugars level within the normal range. So that is an example of a negative feedback system, where the amount or the concentration of the hormone to be released will be dependent upon the substance that the hormone regulate. And in this example, the sugar or the glucose concentration in blood is the substance in control. This is simply a diagrammatic representation which correlate the two of them, that once the level goes high, the hormone will be released, and once the sugar levels goes down, so the hormone will be inhibited, and that's how the system function. So another system is what we call the positive system, feedback system, where the substance being controlled, once it goes high, it will continue to go high without being inhibited. And that one only applies in oxytocin hormone. As we see later during the process of parturition or giving birth at the contraction of the uterus, that the posterior pituitary gland will continue to secrete oxytocin hormone until the baby is expelled. And that is one rare example of the positive feedback system, and it only applies with oxytocin. So this is the system we are talking about, the hypothalamus hypophyseal portal system. And it's simply a system, as we later see at the nervous system, where the hormone is released from the hypothalamus, and it will act on the pituitary gland using a structure we call it the hypophyseal portal system. So a portal system is used in anatomy to means where we have an interconnection between the veins and the arteries connecting one part of the body to the other one. We classify the hormones into the hypothalamic hormone into the one that is produced on the anterior part of the gland and the one produced on the posterior side of the gland. But just to note that we'll start with the anterior part of the gland. And these hormones usually end with releasing hormone, meaning by themselves, they will act on other glands to cause the release of that hormone on that particular gland. So for example, the thyroid releasing hormones, so by the name thyroid, meaning it will act on the thyroid gland to release the thyroid hormone. We equally have the growth hormone releasing hormone, and we have the gonadotropin releasing hormone and the corticotropin releasing hormone. So we'll be looking at the particular gland as time goes by. Those are the hormones from the anterior part of the gland. And the posterior side of the gland only has two hormones. We have the oxytocin and the vasopressin, or sometimes called the antidiuretic hormone. This is a microgram showing the distinction between the two glands. And the staining is using the H&E stain. And last time, I think your class rep was calling me when you went to MOST for your practicals. And he was trying to inquire on what you should learn about in medical physiology 1. And I remember telling him that it's all about the cells and not the systemic physiology. And if you're keen enough to have gotten a chance to look into a microscope, and this is a standard staining we're using, the H&E stain, where it gives this pinkish color. And by this microgram, you can just be able to appreciate that we have the diffuse cells here, where the nucleus is a little bit more darker than the cytoplasm. And this one distinguishes between the anterior and the posterior. And this indicates that we have an active production of hormones as shown by the activities of the nucleus. However, on the posterior side, you can just appreciate we have several vesicles here, and there is no active production of hormones at the posterior side. We'll get into that one in detail. But the anterior pituitary cells and type include the following, as I said initially. We have the corticotropes. So the corticotropes are the cells that release the adrenal corticotropin hormone, or called the ACTH. We have the gonadotropes. These are cells that release the gonadotropes. And the gonadotropes are the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. And this one functions entirely on the reproductive system. We have the thyrotropes. These are the thyroid stimulating hormones. And then we have the lactotropes that release or produces the prolactin. And we have the somatotropes. So somatotrope from the word somatic cells, meaning it concerns with the growth of the body cells. Thus, it releases the growth hormone. So that was giving a summary between the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland and the hormone it secretes. All hormones are produced from the anterior pituitary gland, except the oxytocin and the vasopressin. But I also noted that the posterior pituitary gland hormones are not secreted from the posterior. They are rather secreted from the hypothalamus, which you call it the master gland. We will later come to see or understand why we refer to being the master gland. But that is where the hormone from the posteriors are synthesized and will be transported and stored in the posterior pituitary gland. Let's move on and see the adrenal gland. So the adrenal gland are sometimes called the suprarenal gland because they are located on top of each kidney. And this is also equally a microgram illustrating between the two of them. And you're in histology class, if you can still remember that we divide it into the medulla and the cortex. Still diagram illustrating that we have the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis. It simply means at the highest side we have the hypothalamus. Just below it we have the adrenal gland, and specifically the anterior pituitary gland, where ACTH is secreted, and the ACTH will act on the adrenal gland to release the corticosteroid or the catecholamines, and we later come and see them in details on how which of them has a distinct function. So the hypothalamic pituitary axis still work using the negative system. That, for example, the maintenance of the osmolarity, which is being controlled partly by the kidney, and the ADH, or the antidiuretic hormone, being secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. And all of them using a negative feedback system that we talked initially are able to maintain the osmolarity within the 290 millimole range, as we see later. It's just a diagrammatic representation that histologically we divide the adrenal gland into two zones majorly. We have the medulla and the cortex, but the cortex we still subdivide it histologically into zones. And these zones, we call them the zona. So the zona originate from the word zone. We have a zone that usually appear like a mesh-like, and we call that the zona reticulata. And then we have the middle zone, which called the zona fasciculata and the zona glomerularis. So we'll be able to see later each part of them as a distinct part that produce a very specific kind of hormones and the effect the hormones will have. It's just a picture of a condition called the Cushing syndrome that we later see as part of the abnormality associated with the adrenal gland. This is another diagram illustrating the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. It's still the same axis, and the control system we said for all is a negative control system. And in this example, we take the blood level of the testosterone, for example. So once the level goes down, and the hypothalamus together with the anterior pituitary gland will detect that the testosterone level has really gone down, and it will instruct the anterior pituitary gland to secrete both LH and FSH, and both of them will act on the seminiferous tubule within the testis. And with that command, the Leydig cells will be able to secrete testosterone. And the negative system bugs continue again, and that one ensures that we have a certain level of testosterone in blood. So that was an example in male, but in female for the same axis, we'll use estrogen as an example of the regulator. And in this case, when you later see the reproductive system, we have sometimes we have an LH surge, and that one is because will cause the ovulation. And the feedback system, you can appreciate here that is both negative and positive system. So quickly we can look at the female hormones. So the female hormones include both estrogen and progesterone, and the effect usually start to be felt from the pubertal stage until the later stages. We also have the oxytocin and prolactin, and oxytocin we said is take part during the process of giving birth, meaning it causes the contraction of the small muscles. So prolactin is concerned with the synthesis of milk. So the gonads are male. Male gonads are the testes, and the female gonads are the ovaries, which are two, of course, in size for the two of them. So that was an introduction into the hormones in the body, how we classify them. We have the two modalities based on where the receptors are located. And we also talk about the messenger system or the secondary messenger system. And I think I remember in your examination, there was an SAQ where you are told you use, perhaps it was, I think it was insulin or some other hormones as an example to illustrate how the secondary messenger system takes place as a form of cell communication. And that was borrowed from this system, but on the basis of cell biology. So I want us to end that session here as an introduction. And once we meet again, we'll be looking at each and every particular hormone in details and the role it plays, and we'll be looking them in a certain classification because several hormones affect a particular system, and we'll start our journey from there. So I want us to end this introduction here today. And once we meet, we'll start looking at each and every particular hormone in details. So unless there's a question, I'll request we end this session here today until we meet again. Otherwise, good morning.